Matthew and Barnaby O'Connor, and we're very pleased to welcome to the stage Minnie Lane. Thanks so much for joining us again. I'd like to start for a question before we take some from the audience, and I think one of the strengths of the film is how you tie this industry and those who perpetuated it so closely to the media of their time. That Ross Jeffries, it started with a self-published book. And the next generation was sort of the beginning of the internet. And then it turns into our Web 2.0 with YouTube, Facebook, and all of these social media tools. What are your thoughts on whatever people's ideas might be about this or the causes? What are your thoughts on that element of it, is how much the disruption of our media environment over the past 25 years has been linked to, I think what you said, Minnie, was this dehumanization of individuals, particularly young white males. Do you want to pick up on that and just sort of explain the construction of the film by tying those two ideas together?
Okay, you'll have to excuse us. This is the first time we've done this, so it might take a bit of time for us to figure out the dynamic. I think one thing for sure is I think this industry, as it is now, would have a much harder time surviving without social media. I think what YouTube and Facebook and what that allows people to do is kind of explore go down their own avenues. And obviously YouTube is something that is generally very private. You can watch that on your laptop or at home, nobody else knows you're watching. And I think that does kind of speak to some of those elements of especially loneliness and frustration. It can tap into that quite quickly because there isn't really a countervailing voice to what you're saying. It's a one direction thing. You guys want to
add? I think one of the things about sort of the world that we live in now and social media is that a lot of people want to stay connected. So back in the day, posting a cassette tape and reading or not being able to search stuff online, to now everybody wants to share Facebook. They want to share their Instagram. They want to share their Snapchat. And I think the thing is to perpetuate this kind of business, I think people are actually more willing to give out their personal information, which links them to their friends, their location, all this kind of stuff. So I think from a personal perspective, it could potentially get a lot worse now that we are a lot more connected and a lot more free with giving out our personal information.
Do you want to follow up on Minnie, the idea that we've never been more connected, but perhaps we've never been more lonely?
Yeah, I think people are more susceptible to this now than ever because there's so many ways that people can avoid human connection now. You can basically live your whole life online and never be forced to make human connection. And so a lot of people can get to their 20s, 30s, 40s even, and just not really have decent human connection in their life, and they just don't have the skills to do it. And that makes them very susceptible to being sucked in by companies like this. I think it's more important than ever for a film like this to be made and show people, this is not the answer. The problem is that people are starved of human connection, and watching this film, it actually just makes me so sad because we're in desperate need of the right answer to be given to people, and the right answer is love and building human connection, and that starts with building a connection with yourself. You've got to go on a journey of personal development, because without that, you're creating this character, and then you're becoming confident in playing this character, and you're getting further and further away from what you really need, which is connection with yourself and a connection with others.
Great. Let's take some questions from the audience. There's one right in the middle. Go ahead.
One of my favorite TV episodes is about one of these guys getting killed after he did this to Abe Lynn. Are you familiar with the closer, that TV episode?
No.
Okay, well, everyone should look for it. It's called Tapped Out. Now, we saw one of these guys getting slapped, but you must have other stories about these guys getting some comeuppance. Can you tell us about some of those things?
So the questions regarding, stories you may have encountered or issues where more of these pickup artists were, rejected in some way, comeuppance is the term that was used.
I think unfortunately, the industry seems to survive all of the bashings that it gets. There's the Julian Blanc scandal, even the game. You think it's not the first time that this industry's been exposed. It's not the first time that people have been shown, look at this awful stuff that's going on. And that's why I think it's so important for us to take a different narrative this time and actually have a conversation about what we can do about it. It's not enough to just look at what's happening. We've got to look at why it's happening and really understand that on a deep level. And I think this documentary does a really good job at showing that, how complex it is and the reasons why these people get sucked into the industry in the first place.
Follow up, I want to take other questions, but I think that's the thing you brought up right in the beginning is you feel there's this lack of mentorship, this lack of role models for young males especially to look up to, and that might be perhaps a recent phenomenon. I think one of the people said, your teachers, other people, they don't have enough time for you, so you look for leadership elsewhere. Do you have any more that you want to add to that idea? Because I think it does come up in the film.
So I think there's lots of different types of comeuppance. There is, like you say, Max, RSD Max being slapped. There is Julian Blanc being shamed massively. There are people getting, some of these instructors have been attacked in nightclubs or physical violence. I think also, and this is hopefully a point that we've managed to make, is I think there's an element of when you turn yourself into something like this, there's like a karma element that comes back to you. And I hope that we've managed to communicate some of that with Ross at the end, and he's alone. And you see like, okay, so you did this and you've spent your life doing this, but what have you got at the end? I think Paul makes that point very well. It's like, it is a penetrating loneliness, and I think that is something that a lot of these guys, Minnie has quite a lot of experience, you know people that have kind of got to that point, don't you?
I have a lot of empathy for the guys that come on this course because I still work as a dating and personal development coach, but I really teach people, I give people love essentially, and I teach them by giving them my love, I show them how to love themselves, which is what everybody needs to do. But yeah, it's not uncommon for me to have a student that's in their 30s whose relationship history is nothing, and so I think that we do need to really try and understand this from the perspective of the students. If you'd got to your mid-30s and you'd never even held hands or had any interest from the opposite sex, you'd probably be pretty angry too, and you'd probably be pretty lonely too, and you'd probably be desperate too. And unless we really try to understand it from their perspective, we're never going to get the answers, because it's not enough to blame. It's not enough to just point the finger and say this is wrong. We've got to show them how to do things right.
Let's take more questions from our audience. Yeah, thanks, Minnie. What was the impetus for deciding to make this film, and is what you received in the end or made in the end what you think you started out to make?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to speak. Okay, there are a few things. First of all, I'd read the game. The game was a phenomenon. People maybe that haven't read it or weren't. There was a kind of book that got passed around and talked about, and people look back on it now very differently, but it was the kind of, and so I was aware of these guys, and then I had a friend who was, I was on a film shoot with her, and she was explaining that she was a conversation girl, very similar to what Minnie was doing in when she was, and I kind of thought, wow, that sounds crazy, but also I heard, just randomly on YouTube, I heard a speech by Julian Blanc, who was the guy that was a big scandal, and it was, I don't know, it was very arresting. So I think it was those three elements come together, and you just think, there's something in this. In terms of, is it the film we started out making? No, I don't think it is. I think all of us have gone on a journey, whatever you want to call it, together. Like there's been like, how do we feel about this, and what are the alternatives if we're not going to do this? And do you want to?
I think this might also answer the gentleman's question as well. I think the more that we looked into this industry, the more that we looked at the content, the more shocked that we became. And I think the thing is that to answer the gentleman's question, there recently a Vice episode online that kind of ousted them as one of the pickup companies as faking a lot of the kind of the stuff that they do with paying women to work for them and doing what they're told. And I think the thing is, the more that we got into it, the more we realized, okay, you know, people need to be nicer to each other, and we need to kind of shine a light on a very dark area of the internet and try and you know, bring hope and happiness and love to people. So yeah.
Thanks. Just have a question. Yes. So the idea that these, you know, instructors are frauds and people have been taken for thousands of dollars for their courses. Has any of those individuals taken action against these instructors for these courses?
I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's likely. Well, one, they probably have very good non-refund policies. Also, I think it's important to recognise the sort of cultish nature of it, where it's probably difficult for them to speak out. And another thing is, I think guys often don't actually realise that they've been taken down the wrong path. You know, because if you've been lonely all your life and then suddenly you've got all these women in your life, it's easy for them to think that they're better off than they were. But I think it's a bit like, you know, having a starving person and then giving them a room full of crisps. And they'd think, oh wow, my hunger's finally solved. But actually, when you think about why they're hungry, it's because their body is crying out for nutrition. And this is not giving them real nutrition.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
add to that? One of the mantras of this particular industry is, you know, there's no such thing as failure. And what that does is it hones in on one of the core principles of NLP, which is you just keep, there's no such thing as failure, you're just learning, you'll get better, you'll get better, you'll get better. So I don't think people look at it as I'm being taken advantage of. It's merely one lesson, and you just keep learning another, and you will keep, you know, getting better. And that's not really the case, I don't think.
I'd like to take a final question. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Just add very, very quickly to that. So there is also an online, another online subculture called the PUA hate culture, which is about people that have had bad experiences with pickup companies, and they go on there and they write and they complain. And so to answer your question, kind of as it was originally, yes, there's no legal action that's been taken, but there are definitely groups, online groups that develop against this kind of thing.
Yeah, I'll take your question in the middle, please. Is regarding in your interviews with or Kurt Kleiman around metoo. I'm with her. Those conversations, was any part of the interviews? Hopefully I articulated your question well enough. Yeah, so the question's just regarding whether people you interviewed, if the assault of individuals became part of that conversation in the interviews, or if it was really just the interviews were isolated to the activities.
Okay. All right. So Minnie and I talked about this a lot, especially in regards to sort of what happened in San Diego, which I did. You know, when we did the interviews, we did kind of question some of these guys about that incident. The general response is, well, that's not us. You know, we don't do that, and we don't teach that kind of thing. I think also I'm not sure if there's an awareness, because there's obviously there's that kind of, and then there's, like you say, there's the kind of persistence and the pestering, and it's almost like there's not an awareness that is a problem with some of these guys. I don't know if that makes sense. Just like, look, just go out, and I mean we've spoken about maybe if you want to talk about you don't want to be woman number 30. Do you remember that when we were talking in Covent Garden, and it's like, yeah, do you want?
What do you want to say about that?
Well, not just I just remember you saying, it's like if someone comes up to you and says, you know, I think you whatever they say, and they make and that's quite complimentary. But if you're the 35th person that they've done that to that day, that's not the same thing, and that's not the same attitude.
Yeah, it's not genuine. That's the thing. if you go up to, if you've never spoken to a girl before in your life and you go up to her and you say, oh, you know, this is really unusual for me to be doing this, fine. But if you've gone up to 30 people that day and you're going, oh, this is a little bit weird and unusual for me to do this, that's just lying, you know. And that, you know, honesty is just the #1 policy with this. Just being dishonest is never a good idea. I don't know if I'm answering. I haven't answered your question there at all.
I think, and that's the challenge with this film, is that there's so many factors at play and it's extremely complex. But I think a great credit to you both for crafting a film that really does clearly articulate a lot of these issues that may be unfamiliar at a deeper level to us. So I want to thank you, Minnie, for joining us as well. I thank Barnaby for bringing this fantastic film to Hot Docs. Please give them a huge round of applause. Thank you. And I just want to remind you, again, this is eligible for the Audience Choice Award, so please do vote for this film. And as this is the last screening of the night and our lovely volunteers have spent all day here, please make sure you can exit the theater. I'm sure if you'd like to speak with our directors or Minnie, perhaps outside the theater towards the lobby would be a good place. Thanks again.